The Denver Broncos take on the Dallas Cowboys this weekend for a Sunday morning matchup between the AFC and the NFC to talk about and preview the big-time matchup. I'm joined alongside by Marcus Mosher, host of the Locked On Cowboys podcast, for a crossover episode. We preview the Broncos defense against the Cowboys offense, the Broncos offense against the Cowboys defense, storylines, and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another Locked On NFL crossover. The Denver Broncos travel this weekend to take on the Dallas Cowboys. I'm Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos, and I'm talking with Marcus Mosher, host of the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We're going to preview Sunday's matchup between the sixth-ranked defense in Denver against the NFL's number one ranked offense. And look, Marcus, thank you so much for joining us here today. I mean, it's great to join you and your audience, and I'm glad that you could join Broncos Country's audience as well to preview this matchup.
Yeah, I'm excited for this game. I'm excited for this show. It should be a good one.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for obviously a lot of storylines coming into this. So, I want to start things off here, Marcus, by opening things up in terms of questioning for the Dallas Cowboys side of things. I think for Broncos country, they're looking at this matchup, and a lot of fans, look, this has been an interesting season for Denver. They started off 3-0. They lost 4 straight games. Now they're sitting at 4-4. It's been a weird season, and really trading away Von Miller was one of those things. And the Dallas Cowboys were actually one of those teams that had inquired about what it would take to get Von Miller. Now, for the Cowboys in this regard, what is the number one thing, I think, heading into the week for them this week against the Denver Broncos? Obviously coming off of a Sunday night football victory against the Minnesota Vikings, Cooper Rush mania, going to Amari Cooper, goal line fade in the end. What's the story this week?
So first and foremost, thank you for beating Washington last week and just opening up the division lead even more. Thank you. We appreciate that. For the Cowboys, it's just Dak Prescott, right? Like, how healthy is he? I think he was pretty close to playing last week, and the Cowboys are just being overly cautious. He was a full participant on Wednesday at practice. He's a full participant on Thursday. So it's just, how much can he move around? Are you worried about him in the pocket without Tyron Smith, who's going to miss this game on the left side? That's really the biggest story, because if he's healthy, this is one of the best teams in football.
I mean, I think it's really easy to see. They're a very explosive offense. They're the third scoring offense in the NFL, but the number one in terms of overall yardage and production. A lot of that comes from Dak Prescott. Obviously received that big-time contract. When you look at the receivers, now obviously Michael Gallup's still on injured reserve, but CeeDee Lamb, you look at Amari Cooper, and even Cedric Wilson getting in the mix a little bit, and then Schultz at the tight end position. He's been a fun player to watch the last few weeks when I've caught some Cowboys games. But I like that you mentioned about Dak Prescott and the calf, that there's a little just bit of precaution with it, because soft tissue injuries, they suck, and they can just re-aggravate quickly. So do you imagine they're probably going to be monitoring him throughout the game here? And I mean, could we see potentially, even though if Dak gets the start and does play, could we also see Cooper Rush?
So let's just kind of, back up for a second. He got hurt in the week 6 game against the Patriots in the last play of the game. The Cowboys had a bye week. During that bye week, they did some research on calf injuries for quarterbacks, and they found that there's like a 16% re-injury rate for quarterbacks that suffer these calf strains. And the last thing they can afford is Prescott to hurt this and be out for a month, right? They just don't want that to happen. So they thought if we can give him one more week, kind of monitor him, see how he's doing, it would be much better going into week 9. And he is. He's feeling much better about it. He's not as sore as he was. So I don't expect to see Cooper Rush in this game unless he re-injures it. It shouldn't be a big deal. However, I will say Prescott this year really hasn't been a quarterback that's used his legs really at all, other than, your traditional like rollouts and kind of design runs, on the move. That's about it. I think the leg injury that he suffered last year kind of zapped some of his athleticism and quickness, and he's really just a pocket passer. So I do think you're going to see him more so than usual just stay in the pocket and make those kind of throws rather than using him on design runs and stuff like that.
Well, and also looking at it as well, kind of shifting gears to the defensive side of the ball. Trayvon Diggs has had a very impressive season so far, 7 picks on the year, 11 passes broken up. I mean, right now leading the NFL. He had a great month, 4 interceptions in the month of October. And I think I've also seen a lot of discourse on social media too, that while Trayvon Diggs is making these big plays, he's also given up a lot of yardage through the air. Now, in your opinion, is this based on scheme? Is this just based on the fact that, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some? And who do you think he's going to shadow this weekend in this matchup?
So It's true that Diggs does give up a lot of yards. I think he's like in the top 5 of yards given up, but that's a philosophy thing because the Cowboys have, as you mentioned at the top, the number 1 offense in the league in yards, number 3 in points, and that's really only because Cooper Rush had to play last week that they're not number 1. So they don't necessarily care that he gives up a lot of yards. If he can steal a possession a game like he has through the first 8 weeks of the season, they're fine with that, right? Like that, they're
Yeah.
100% fine with that. So they're okay with him taking risks and being an aggressive cornerback. I think he's going to stay with Cortland Sutton, and that makes sense because of the size advantage that Sutton has over most corners. But how fun would it be, Cody, to see an Alabama versus Alabama matchup on both sides of the ball, right? Amari Cooper versus Patrick Surtain, Jerry Jeudy against Trayvon Diggs. That would be a lot of fun. I hope we at least see it for a couple snaps in this one.
No, I'm with you there. That would be very intriguing. Not to mention, this is Jerry Jeudy's second week back from coming off of that ankle sprain he suffered in week 1 against the Giants. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But another thing, too, looking at this defense, one thing I noticed when watching them against the Minnesota Vikings, and look, I went back and watched the last 2 weeks again, for the Dallas Cowboys. The one thing I wanted to kind of pinpoint there, do you feel like maybe the defense, being as aggressive as they are, do you feel like that also leads to some of those instances? Like, for example, Randy Gregory against the Vikings, he had 2 15-yard penalties that were just absolute killers against the Minnesota Vikings. Is there a concern about that, or is that just because they're playing really aggressive, really fast?
They're going to play fast and aggressive. I think that's one thing that Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn have really stressed. It's, if you're playing at 10% all the time, we can live with some of those type of penalties because eventually it's going to pay off in terms of strip sacks and forcing fumbles and tip balls, interceptions. So you'll get some of that in this game. The Cowboys are not going to shut you down and hold you to, 300 yards of total offense. It's just not going to happen. But they thrive on stopping you in the red zone and making big plays because they know if they can force 2 turnovers against a team like the Broncos, that's going to be the difference in the game. Their offense is just so good that those extra possessions are what makes the difference. So they're going to have mistakes. They're going to give up plays. They're going to have penalties, but it's okay in the grand scheme.
Yeah, and you mentioned something about offense, like, what, they'll live with it. I wish the Broncos could be at that point where they say, what, they'll live up with giving up a couple of plays as long as they get a couple possessions back, because the Broncos offense has struggled, Marcus, and it's been very frustrating to watch, I think, for Broncos fans. But the last thing I'm going to ask you here about the Dallas Cowboys as it pertains to this matchup too, Micah Parsons, he goes a pick right after the Denver Broncos select Patrick Surtain II, and we know that the Cowboys, they wanted that. And I remember in the draft buildup, you and Landon were wanting Patrick Surtain II. I tell you what, he's been fantastic. I'm sure we'll talk about him here in a minute. But so far, from what I've seen from Micah Parsons, he made a transition early on from inside backer. He had to play a little bit of D and some rush, things that he could do really well. How is he done fitting into that kind of hybrid role here in Dan Quinn's defense?
Yeah, so we'll never forgive the Broncos for drafting Patrick Surtain and making the Cowboys trade down. So the Dallas Cowboys really wanted Surtain. That's the guy they wanted at 10. As soon as he was off the board, was at pick number 9. They had to trade it. They traded back, and they're okay with Parsons, but man, Surtain and Diggs on the same team would have been a lot of fun. But Parsons has done really, really well playing both spots. They kind of pick and choose when to use him at edge, when to use him at linebacker, depending on the matchup. My guess in this game is you'll see him a lot more at edge, trying to stop the rushing attacks, trying to stop some of the quick throws. And it's been unbelievable how he's been able to kind of flip back and forth between those 2 spots. He's just been everything the Cowboys could have asked for and more.
And coming up here in just a moment, we're going to flip the script a little bit. Marcus is going to ask me questions about the Denver Broncos. But before we do that, let me tell you about McDonald's, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Proudly serving communities since 1965, McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's been a place where friends and family can come to reconnect. It's a place where classmates, they can meet up for a study group, knowing that they'll have dependable Wi-Fi, endless fries, and all the McFlurries that you could want at McDonald's today. Win or lose, it's a place where teammates and competitors can come together. And it's a place that you always look forward to stopping at when you're on a long road trip to rest your legs and to refuel. And my routine with McDonald's, when I do have it, I have a day off every single Wednesday. So one thing I do, I go to McDonald's in the morning, I get myself a sausage egg McMuffin, I order myself a hash brown, I cut that hash brown in half, and I place it inside my sausage egg McMuffin. We now call that the McRourk. It's been very popular here, the Locked On Broncos podcast. And so we get that at McDonald's today. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to head to your local McDonald's to refuel and reconnect, courtesy of the Locked On Broncos podcast. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm loving it. And Marcus, now we're going to flip things over, and I'm going to open up to you to ask me any questions about the Denver Broncos that you have.
Yeah, I want to start with Teddy Bridgewater because When you look at the stats, they're pretty good. I know he was really beat up early on in the season. He took some brutal shots. That Cleveland game did not look healthy. What is your expectations for him this week against the Cowboys?
Oh, it's really hard, because the first 3 weeks, Marcus, Teddy Bridgewater was playing very efficient football, and he was charging the Broncos downfield. Granted, it was against the Giants, the Jaguars, and the New York Jets, but the NFL's been so weird this year. It's like, how do you really gauge it? But he has struggled in the last 4 to 5 weeks, and my expectation that I have for him, Vic Fangio said it this week, we have to be able to come out and take more shots downfield because the Broncos' formula right now, Marcus, they've just been getting the ball. It's been a snap. Teddy holds onto the ball. He's looking to throw deep. Nothing's there. He always throws it short. So if you need 7 yards, he's going to throw it 4 or 5 yards. And really that's been so predicated, and defenses have been picking up on that. And so the Broncos offense has really been an eyesore for this football team. And Teddy's got to play better. Protection has to be better. There's going to be no Garrett Bowles this week for the Denver Broncos at left tackle. Calvin Anderson's going to slide over there. So that's something you have to always keep an eye on as well, because he doesn't have a lot of experience there, Calvin Anderson. So that's going to be a big key to watch. But Denver goes away from running the football. They have moments where they can run the ball well, and then they go away from it, or the blocking scheme doesn't equate to successful efficiency. And then you have these breakdowns in protection sometimes in terms of pass blocking. And then just decision making by Teddy Bridgewater has faltered here and there. But he is healthier this week. And I think that that's going to make a big difference. It's really hard to expect because the Broncos cannot beat the Cowboys, Marcus, if they come out and they have the mentality that we're just going to throw it short, chew up the clock, and then hopefully they can get points. That's been the thing. They've been chewing up the clock, Marcus, and they've been throwing it short, but they haven't been coming away with points. And that's exactly where things have been hurting them in the last 4 to 5 weeks.
And that was my next question about Garrett Bowles, because he is out of this game, as you mentioned. Bowles has been really good over the last couple of years with Mike Munchak as the offensive coordinator there. So offensive line coach. How much is this of a decrease going to Calvin Anderson?
Well, it's a big blow, right? Because it's your Pro Bowl, All-Pro left tackle that you just signed to a contract extension last season. He's been very solid this year for the Broncos, and I think a lot of the issues that they've had really have been on the interior of the offensive line. Some miscommunications here and there, but for Calvin Anderson, he's a guy that's only started 2 NFL games in his career. One of them was at right tackle last season. The other one was at left tackle when Garrett Bowles had food poisoning for one game and had to be out. And he did a really good job stepping in against Carolina Panthers last year. But I look at this Cowboys defense, how aggressive they are, and I'm a little concerned, not necessarily for Calvin Anderson. I'm just concerned because the lack of experience going against experience is definitely the biggest question in my mind.
All right, let's go ahead and transition to the defense. And man, depending on the game that you watch for the Broncos, you can have wildly different thoughts about their defense, right? Like last week against Washington, they looked really good.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago when they're playing Pittsburgh and Baltimore, they struggled. And what can we expect from this defense in this game?
Well, I tell you what, a lot of the struggles have been attributed to just the injuries that have impacted them. Now, in week 2, the Broncos, they had Bradley Chubb come back, and then he left that game, and he ended up getting ankle surgery afterwards. He won't be back till after the bye week, so you lose a pass rusher. Now you trade away Von Miller. But more importantly, in week 2, you lose Josie Jewell to a torn pec. A couple weeks later, you lose Alexander Johnson to a torn pectoral muscle as well. So there's your 2 starting inside linebackers where when you go back and you watch the tape and you see from when they're in there versus when the new guys have been in there, Justin Sternad and other guys, you're like, oh my goodness, it's such a significant difference. And that's really been an impact for the Broncos. But, I think it's going to be Kenny Young. The Broncos had just traded for him last week after the initial injury to Alexander Johnson. They went out, George Payton made a move, got him. He flies around. He's going to be a little bit more comfortable in the defense this week, having a second week under him. And then Baron Browning's likely going to get the start opposite of him as well. A lot of speed, athleticism coming out of Ohio State this year, the Broncos' 3rd-round draft selection. And then you're going to see a little bit of Justin Sternad being sprinkled in. But there is that dynamic there in terms of the Broncos' defense. The secondary has shored up. Now, Kyle Fuller was on the outside previously this season. He struggled, and he gave up a couple of big plays through the air. So Patrick Surtain actually took his spot, and then Ronald Darby came off of IR and is now the right cornerback. And those 2 guys are going to start there on the outside. The biggest question, though, who's going to take the nickel spot? It could be Nate Hairston, who has done really well in training camp this year for the Broncos, got in last week, or they might move Kyle Fuller there to the nickel spot. So there's so many different things, but the back end of the secondary, Justice Simmons, Kareem Jackson, they are very reliable for the Denver Broncos. So it depends on which team shows up this week. And look, Justin Simmons, he's looking forward to the challenge. He said it yesterday. So I imagine he's going to do everything that he can to help get everybody kind of rallied this week against a very good Cowboys offense.
All right, I want to go back to the pass rush because no Chubb, Von Miller gone. How are the Broncos going to generate a pass rush in this game? Are they going to do so by blitzing? Is Vic Fangio someone who likes to blitz a lot? What do you expect in this one?
Well, Vic predominantly likes to send four, but the last week I think against Washington he blitzed more than I think we've seen him blitz previously, and I think that'll be a good thing too if you have the linebackers to do it. But with backs out of the backfield like Ezekiel Elliott who can hurt you as a receiver and Pollard as a receiver as well, I feel like you really have to pick and choose when you're going to blitz because any of those two guys could leak out and they could burn you in a big time way. So for me, I think that it's going to be balanced, right? You mentioned Dak not really trying to be the guy that's going to take it with his legs and more be that pocket guy. If the Broncos can focus on collapsing the pocket around him and then squeezing it on the interior, I think they bode well in terms of maybe forcing an errant throw, but it's very tough because it requires timing, and Dak is really good at getting the ball out of his hands. So I don't think that we're going to see the Broncos blitz too much. I think if anything, we might see a couple of blitz where they send six, but mostly I think we're going to see four-man blitz, maybe even three-man pressure consistently throughout this game. But you do have Stephen Weatherly on the opposite side of Malik Reed, who had 2 sacks last week against the Washington football team. You have Jonathan Cooper, and then you have some other guys starting to work back in at outside backer. So, Denver's trying to go with a by-committee approach at pass rusher with Von Miller and Bradley Chubb gone. And coming up here in just a moment, both Marcus and myself, we're going to preview the game a little bit more in depth, a couple of the other closing storylines on today's crossover episode, Locked On Broncos, Locked On Cowboys. But before we do that, let me tell you about the 2 sponsors. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos crossover. That's good friends over there at Built Bar and BetOnline.ag. And I love Thanksgiving and all of the good food that comes with it, the pies, the desserts, the treats, but I do like something else as well, and that is a Built Bar, ladies and gentlemen. And Built Bar is healthier in comparison to pie because one slice of pie has upwards to 300 calories, and that is a lot when you stack it on top of your Thanksgiving turkey, everything else that you have on your plate. Whereas if you have a Built Bar, you can get something that tastes exactly like a candy bar. It's covered in 100% chocolate. The bars are soft and easy to chew, but they contain only 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar. That is tremendous value in comparison to a slice of pie. So maybe substitute your Thanksgiving pie with a box of Built Bar today by going to Built.com. And when you go to checkout, make sure you use promo code LOCK15. It's going to get you and your family 15% off your next order at Built.com. Once again, promo code LOCK15 gets you 15% off at Built.com. And our good friends over there at BetOnline.ag. The Denver Broncos are set to travel on the road to take on the Dallas Cowboys. You want to see the lines for that? Go over to BetOnline.ag today, where they're back and better than ever with a brand new website, updated user interface that makes it easier for you, the football fan, the basketball fan, the MMA, boxing fan, whatever sport you like. BetOnline has you covered at betonline.ag. They remain the number one spot for all things pro basketball and pro football, and you can head to their brand new website or use your mobile device today to sign up by going to betonline.ag. Use promo code LOCKEDON. That's going to get you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you sign up today. BetOnline.ag. Promo code LOCKEDON get you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit today. BetOnline.ag. From basketball, football, baseball, postseason, NHL, boxing, and all of your UFC and MMA action, and your favorite Vegas casino games, by the way, BetOnline is the number one place for all that. So don't wait and take advantage today of all the amazing opportunities they have for the 2021 season. BetOnline, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
I will say it's going to be interesting to see how the Cowboys do handle pressure in this game, because if Dak isn't as mobile as we're used to seeing, that could be an issue. Also, Tyron Smith, their all-world left tackle, is not going to play in this game. And that means Ty Nsekhe or Lyle Collins, who started his career as a right tackle, is now going to play left tackle for the first time since college, which was back in 2014. This will be the first time he's played that spot. It could be a little bit of an interesting challenge. Now, I'm not sure if Jonathan Cooper or some of the guys that Denver has are going to really scare him on the outside, but it'll be interesting to see how the Cowboys kind of handle that. I want to just talk about this game in general. How do you see this kind of playing out, Cody? Do you think this is going to be, a 2017 game? Do you think Denver's offense is going to get going? What are you expecting?
Well, I think a lot of it is contingent upon which Denver Broncos offense shows up. And look, I think as I mentioned earlier, if the Broncos can get some rhythm on the offensive side of the ball, if they do have a long drive where they control the time of possession, they have to come away with points. You can't take 5 to 6 minutes off the clock, not come away with points, and then give it back to Dak Prescott and company, because that's just a recipe for disaster. And the Broncos defense, I think if they can hold up and maintain solid play, look, they're going to give up some plays. They're going to give up some points. That's just the necessity of the game with how it is played today, with all the weapons, all the talent that Dallas has on the offensive side of the ball, even on the O-line. Yeah, I know you're missing the left tackle there, but the offensive line is still pretty strong on the interior specifically. So I think that for Denver, this could go either way. If the same Broncos offense that's been playing the last couple of weeks shows up, I don't think it's going to be pretty for the Broncos side here, Marcus. And look, the optimistic side of me, I always try to be realistic for Broncos country. You can't get in a shootout with a team like Dallas because Denver doesn't have the offensive firepower to do it. They have the talent, but they just don't have the firepower from the coordinator standpoint, from the quarterback standpoint to be able to do it. And I think that is a really big concern for me.
I'm interested to see how healthy the Cowboys are because Amari Cooper is dealing with rib injury, hamstring, a foot injury, and now a knee injury. So that's four lower leg things that's going on. CeeDee Lamb sprained his ankle in Wednesday's practice. Michael Gallup is dealing with a calf injury. We're not sure if he's going to play yet. He might be active. Blake Jarwin, one of their starting two tight ends, they use both of them a ton, is not going to play in this game due to a hip injury. And then we just talked about Tyron and Dak Prescott. Now, the Cowboys have a lot of other weapons. Even if Amari and CD are banged up, they can use Ezekiel Elliott and Pollard and Schultz. And they've got this tight end they like in Sean McEwen, who's coming back this week. So it's just going to be interesting to see how the Cowboys try to attack Denver. I think this game is going to be closer than what people think. I don't think this is going to be a shootout. I know the Cowboys are favored by 10 points right now on Bet Online. There you go. That's a shout out to one of our sponsors. So I'm thinking like a 27-23 type of game. Does that seem realistic?
I mean, I think it's certainly possible, right? Because for the Broncos, the weird thing about them, like they get off to slow starts on offense, but usually they have a pretty good fourth quarter where they're able to put up 17 to 20 points. It's been really weird this year. So if they do get in a situation like that, I think that could be very realistic. I think with injuries on both sides considering, I think it very well might be possible. And I kind of told our listeners of Broncos country, this game kind of gives me a little bit of a vibe that I had a couple years ago when the Broncos traveled on the road to take on the Houston Texans. It was Drew Lock's first career full-on start. Actually, no, it was the second start. He started against the Chargers week 4. But it was the Texans game where he goes in and he just lights it up. I don't know if Teddy Bridgewater is going to light it up, but I do think that the Broncos are going to have a few opportunities here to make some plays. And if they can get guys like Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams going in the rushing game, and they can find maybe Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, or Jerry Jeudy, in some one-on-one coverages and maybe get across the middle of the field. It all comes down to protection and decision-making. I think the Broncos can play really well here against Cowboys. I think it could be a fun game. And I had actually said on Pro Football Network, Marcus, I believe that this actually might be probably one of the more entertaining games of the week when you look at it. So who knows? Despite the fact that Denver's 4-4 and the Cowboys are sitting there at 7-1, I think this might be maybe an under the radar type of game of the week here.
Yeah, the Cowboys don't play in normal games. They play in just wildly entertaining games that come down to the last couple, possessions. So I'm sure that's what's going to happen here. The biggest fear for the Cowboys is if Denver can run on them and control the clock, and Teddy Bridgewater can use a short passing game to just keep the Cowboys off the field, that's where they're going to get in trouble. The Cowboys can play a positive game script better than anybody. Like once they get up on a team by 10 points, by 14 points, it's kind of over because then the offense has all this confidence. The defense plays with, aggression. They're fast. But when they get into negative game scripts or ones that are close in the fourth quarter, that's when games get kind of tight for them. So it should be a fantastic matchup. Cody, make sure you tell the people where they can find you because I know you've been crushing it all week on Locked On Broncos.
I appreciate you. Well, Locked On Broncos is free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. And look, on behalf of the whole entire Locked On podcast network, I just want to say thank you to Broncos Country. Thank you to Cowboys Nation for making Locked On Broncos and Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. We're also here on YouTube, so people get to see us rather than just hear our voice. So, like I said, I'm excited for this matchup, Marcus. Tell Broncos Country where they can hear you.
Yeah, I'm at Marcus_Mosher. My co-host is at McCoolBCB. That is Landon McCool. We do 5 shows a week. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you guys get your podcasts. Cody, thank you so much for joining me. Enjoy the game, and we'll see you guys next time.